Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, even before the Grenfell Tower inquiry has got underway properly, there's growing pressure on the judge leading it to step down. Labour MP for Kensington, Emma Dent-Coad, says Sir Martin Moore-Bick lacks credibility with the local residents. And the London Mayor, Sadiq Khan, has also warned that he urgently needs to improve relations with the community. Our home editor, Mark Easton, has been getting the views of residents and politicians alike.
Grenfell Tower is black with urgent and unanswered questions. The community in its shadow seeks answers, but many say they don't have confidence in the man the Prime Minister's appointed to head the public inquiry. Sir Martin Moore-Bick, Cambridge-educated and called to the bar in 1969, is a former judge. But his professional and establishment credentials don't impress the area's local Labour MP, who says he should quit now.
We don't have anybody we can trust there, and some of the groups are refusing to cooperate with the inquiry. And what kind of inquiry is that? There's no inquiry at all if people refuse to cooperate with them, and I understand that. These people have been totally let down and betrayed.
Justice is too high in demand. Just hear the truth.
Close to the tower, I met Chris, a local charity worker who lost a close friend in the fire. His views reflect those of many here.
If we can get someone that can empathize or understands the feeling of the people they are representing and the people they are going to interview, because he's going to interview witnesses, he needs to know where they are coming from. If he doesn't have that kind of background, it'd be difficult for him to start to even begin to imagine.
The London Mayor, Sadiq Khan, echoed by Labour's leader Jeremy Corbyn, is not calling for the inquiry head to go, but says he must win the community's confidence. Former Attorney General Dominic Grieve believes Sir Martin must be allowed to get on with the job.
I think we should just be a little bit careful about reacting and saying that somebody else has got to be provided. And as I say, the problem is, once we start going down this road, there's potentially no stopping it.
This community has long felt marginalised from those who have power over them. Respect and trust are always in short supply, and this tragedy has served to diminish those priceless commodities still further. In one of the flats right beneath the tower, I met Benazir, a mum with a couple of preschool kids who's also a local Labour councillor.
Did you say, Mum, where you're going?
She says the borough's Conservative leader, newly appointed, also faces an uphill struggle to win the trust of people in this ward.
Why would anything change now? I mean, will it change?
Well, a fire might change things.
Well, I would hope so. I would hope so, but I'm quite doubtful because I already feel like they're going to cover up a lot of things.
This is a community still grieving, still in shock.
And it's hard, as a mum, to imagine what the parents went through when the fire was coming. And I know some people who were on the phone to people in that fire. And they said, the fire's coming, we can't get out.
The physical and emotional needs of those touched by the tragedy are still being dealt with. The Grenfell Fire Response Team said today it has now fulfilled the promise to rehouse all those made homeless by the tragedy within 3 weeks. But this family, currently in a hotel, say the flat they've been offered is too small and too far away.
I told you I'm not going nowhere from this area. I'm not going from this area. And then they offer you, you don't like it, you take, you don't like it, you take it, you don't like it, you don't take it, you're going to be on the street. There's no more than that. There's no more.
Building the strength and trust needed to move forward from this tragedy is going to take courage and commitment. Mark Easton, BBC News, North Kensington.
It was the Prime Minister's promise after the Grenfell fire that those affected would get a good temporary home within 3 weeks. That deadline is tomorrow. The government says it's offered housing to those who need it, but some families have told us why they feel what's being offered isn't always acceptable. Tolu Adeoye has this report.
This is the hotel that we were accommodated nearly 3 weeks ago.
Sajjad has been living in this hotel room since the Grenfell fire. He, his mother and sister escaped from the 3rd floor. The memories of that night are still raw.
This building has, I think, 12th floor as well, so people from Grenfell Tower, they could be on the 12th floor as well, so people like me, they just don't want to sleep at night.
In the aftermath of the fire, the Prime Minister promised that every affected family would be offered a good quality temporary home within 3 weeks. Sajad's family are one of more than 100 households waiting to be rehoused. He says they will stay in the hotel until permanent accommodation is offered. Why wouldn't you accept temporary accommodation?
It's difficult to accept a temporary accommodation knowing that you are already in one temporary accommodation, and people, they just don't want to be moved around so many times.
So how many people would you say are still living in this block?
In this particular area, I know he's there, they're there, she's there.
Those living in neighbouring blocks to the tower, some of which are still without hot water and gas, have also been offered temporary accommodation. Councillor Benazir Lashari has chosen to remain at her home.
They have tried to offer me other accommodation, but it's very difficult with children. And, you know, I've got to try to look out for them before anything else.
She says many people simply don't feel the accommodation that's been put forward is suitable for their needs.
I've spoken to people who've said they've been offered stuff which is completely out of the borough, or is looking at the tower, and who wants that? After everything that everyone's been through, it's unspeakable what people have been through, and it's only if you were here on the ground that you would see, and it's only if you were in that tower that you would truly know what was taking place. And I think after all of that, to still be moved around and shifted around and fobbed off, it's not acceptable.
This is their responsibility. It's our worry, but this is their responsibility. If they give a promise, Theresa May say we're going to house in 3 weeks or so, they put themselves in pressure, you know.
So for many, like Sajad, the wait for a home will go beyond tomorrow's deadline. Tolu Adeoye, BBC London News.
Well, tonight, families affected by the tragedy are in Kensington meeting the police officer leading the Met's criminal investigation. Let's find out more from our Home Affairs correspondent Nick Beake. And Nick, I gather you've spoken to some of the families.
Yes, Riz, and for these families, this is the first opportunity for them to put questions to the man leading the Metropolitan Police's criminal investigation, Commander Stuart Cundy. Also at the meeting will be the Westminster coroner, Fiona Wilcox, whose job it is to try and identify those people who have died. But we know from talking to the families and their lawyers, they're already unhappy because they had to submit their questions they wanted to put to the authorities before 11 o'clock yesterday, and they say it's simply wrong that they were given something like a 3-hour window to do so. They'd like to be able to ask questions tonight as they think of things. We saw some of the families arriving earlier today. They hope to get answers about the ongoing criminal investigation. They're unhappy about the flow of information, specifically information about their loved ones, people who have died. We've heard, haven't we, over the past few weeks, suspicion about the official death toll, the true number of people who have lost their lives in this tragedy. People also want to know information about how long the criminal investigation will last. Are there any potential suspects who have been lined up? What sort of documents have been seized? What are the next steps in this process? The Metropolitan Police, on the other hand, who have lots of family liaison officers here tonight who are greeting families and ushering them into this meeting, the Mets say that this is a painstaking investigation. They've already said it will take beyond the end of the year for Grenfell Tower to be searched, and they say this is an operation of almost unprecedented scope. Aside from counter-terrorism investigations, they haven't been able to deal with something like this before. They've been trying to give a sense of just how difficult the forensic work is, trying to deal with the aftermath of the fire. We expect this meeting, Riz, to last maybe 2 hours or so, at which point we know that families will come out. We may be able to speak to them a little later, but certainly going in a subdued atmosphere, but also people desperate, as I say, for information.
Indeed, many unanswered questions still, as you say. Nick, thanks very much. That's our Home Affairs correspondent, Nick Beake. Well, almost 3 weeks on from the Grenfell fire, and there's still concern that some of the money raised through donations isn't getting through to those who need it most. So how much has been raised for victims and survivors, and what's being done to make sure those working on the ground get it to the right people? Well, Claudia Liza Amar has been going through all the figures.
Hi, Liz, thank you. Well, we already know that the government pledged £5 million. That works out to around £5,500 per household. Community Secretary Sajid Javid has already said that half of the people entitled to that pot of money have already got that. But what about the charitable donations? Well, there has been a massive amount of fundraising and donations made, and we've been going through all the figures and have estimated that incredibly more than £17 million has been raised so far. So where's all that coming from? Well, it's come from a number of different charities, crowdfunding websites, and that Simon Cowell charity single. But let's break that down for you a little bit more. The largest amount is coming from the Evening Standard's Dispossessed Fund. Now, that's raised £5 million. While the Red Cross Appeal, that's raised more than £4 million. And finally, the Kensington and Chelsea Foundations also raised that same amount, £4 million. So now we have an idea how much has been raised. The main question is that money getting to the victims and survivors of the fire? Well, hopefully someone who could shed some light on all of that is Gerard Oppenheim. He's from the London Emergency Trust, one of the charities that's overseeing the distribution of the funds. And Gerard, incredible, £17 million has been raised through donations. As I said, the main question people are asking, is that really getting through to people in need?
Well, some of it is already out there, distributed by local organisations on the ground. The London Emergencies Trust, which I'm a trustee of and which I chair, we have a particularly specialist role, and that is providing funds to the bereaved where somebody was killed or where somebody is missing, presumed dead, and also to those who've been injured, whether they were injured relatively in a minor way or in a more serious way and have been in hospital for a while.
So we know a number of households, a number of people have been affected by this. I was just speaking to one of the main people at the Harrow Club, one of the charities on the ground that were helping people, helping residents, and they're still getting residents saying they have no money, they have no cash. And when I mentioned the London Emergency Trust to him, he said, what's that? He didn't even know what it was. How are we getting to people, letting them know that you're there with this pot of cash?
Well, as I said, our cash, the money that we have through the Red Cross, we work in partnership with them, and we also have some funds from the London Community Foundation and the Kensington and Chelsea Foundation. Our money is specifically for next of kin and for those who were injured. That is our role. Others are providing funds for other activity and for other people who have just been made homeless. So it's a complicated picture. We work through police family liaison officers, we work through the British Red Cross humanitarian team, and we're also starting to work with other community organisations on the ground so that the information about us does get out much further than it has done so far.
And what about all the donations that was made of food, of clothes? Who can forget those incredible pictures hours after the fire, people donating so much? What's going on with that?
Well, the clothes, the Red Cross has collected, I think it's 3 football pitches in size worth of clothes. What they're going to do is sort them. Clothes that are new will go back into the community for people to have. Clothes that they can't really do anything with will go for disposal to RAG, and the money raised from that will come to the London Fire Relief Fund, so in due course to us, and others will be going into Red Cross shops to be sold.
Really quickly, what do people need to do? Anybody watching who needs any of this money, what can they do to actually get access to it?
If they're next of kin, if they were injured, they need to get in touch either with one of the humanitarian teams on the ground at the Westway Centre, or if they have a police family liaison officer through the police, they'll get a little form to fill in just to tell us who they are and how to pay the money to them.
OK, Gerard Oppenheim from the London Emergency Trust, thanks very much.
Thank you.
3 weeks ago tonight, the Grenfell Tower burned. This evening, a private meeting between the survivors and relatives, the police and the coroner has taken place in a bid to answer some of the many, many questions that this tragedy has provoked. As it was confirmed that 190 high-rise blocks in England have now failed combustibility tests, 3 hospitals revealed that they too have the same cladding that has failed safety tests. Here's our senior Home Affairs correspondent, Simon Israel.
There is a growing realisation that time is not healing, that too much remains hidden, that there's growing discontent among the families of victims over the lack of news. An email was circulated from police inviting families and supporters to London's Olympia for a meeting with the senior investigating officer and the coroner, Fiona Wilcox, but limiting places to 5 per family. Whilst you will not be able to put questions directly to the coroner or Commander Cundy, the team are collating questions for them, as it is likely most families would be asking similar questions. Could you please send to me your questions by return email? More than 100 are expected here this evening, with many still bewildered and still angry, and with many untold stories. I have heard of a woman who lived on the 18th floor but was found on the 23rd. A family of 6, all feared dead in the fire. And a woman who sublet to 2 tenants who are still missing, and she has disappeared, too scared to come forward. A 10th floor flat in the tower had been Antonio Roncolato's home for 27 years. He's now living out of a hotel room, reliving the memories of that night over and over again.
The most upsetting thing is, okay, it is the loss of young children. This is for me, it's really...
These are children you knew?
I knew, of course. You wait for them in the lift, they hold the door for you, they come in with a bike, they kick the ball around, and then they, oh, sorry, mate, sorry, so, you brushing their head, I knew them.
This was his living room before the fire, and this is what he and his son Christopher want to recreate somewhere else. But he's not in a rush and not a priority to be rehoused.
I had a comfortable, nice life, which I worked very hard for, Christopher too, both of us working, paying the full rent, council tax paid, all what is due as a citizen, and it is due because of other people's negligence, the so-called brains or intelligence, not the working class, not the people on the ground like us, that all this went wrong. And therefore, because of them, the tower was burned, they burned my house down, so I'd like to have something that is exactly on the same standard of living like I had before.
Amid all the tributes and appeals are questions and demands for explanation. Tonight's meeting has not been set up to deliver answers on individuals unaccounted for, but to lay out the process that all these families will face in the years ahead.
Simon Israel. Well, we're joined now by our social affairs editor, Jackie Long, who's in West London tonight, but not near the tower, over at the Olympia Conference Centre. What's going on?
Well, this meeting, which Simon's just been talking about, which has been going on behind me since about 6 o'clock, it is such an important meeting for the families. It is absolutely fundamental. Almost 3 weeks on, and officially the number of people confirmed dead remains at 18. The rest, around 80, at least 80, are missing, presumed dead. And as one relative told me on his way in, that is simply not good enough as far as the families are concerned. They are desperate to have the deaths of their loved ones acknowledged. They are desperate to bury their dead, and they simply do not understand why the identification process is taking so long. So that is one of the main reasons this meeting has been called tonight, to answer some of their questions. But I have to say there was scepticism going into the meeting from some of the families who do not believe that their questions will be answered. As Simon said, they had to submit questions in advance, and some of them were very unhappy about that. One man who lost 6 members of his family in the fire said to me, why won't they speak directly to me, answer my questions directly? This whole issue of numbers has been corrosive for weeks now, and I think the distrust and scepticism has been growing, not least because of what is now accepted widely as a wholly inadequate response to this tragedy by the authorities, but particularly Kensington and Chelsea Borough Council. Now, we know on Friday that the council leader, Nick Paget-Brown, stood down. There was a new council leader, Elizabeth Campbell, a Conservative, a former cabinet member. She came out yesterday with a very direct apology. No ifs, no buts, I'm sorry. But will she be able to repair the distrust among the bereaved and the survivors? She has a very big task on her hands.
Jackie Long. Well, earlier in Birmingham, I caught up with the Community Secretary, Sajid Javid. He was there to address the local government association, and I asked the Secretary if the buck for Grenfell does now stop with him.
It is very much on my desk, and this is something I've thought about every day since that terrible tragedy happened. It's been almost 3 weeks now. but I'm very much alive to knowing that we really need to think carefully about how we help all the victims, their families, their friends, but also look to the longer term about recovery, and we learn all the right lessons from this.
Why did it take so long to fill the immediate void afterwards of need in every dimension?
I think that is one of the lessons to learn from this terrible tragedy. I think what is clear, certainly at the moment that this tragedy unfolded, I think a lot more was expected of everyone, including, of course, the local authority. I think it's fair to say that this kind of tragedy on this scale would overwhelm any local authority, but despite that, I think the reaction on the ground was lacking. I think it took a while for both central government with other local authorities in the area and what's called the so-called London Resilience Plan for all of that come together. So the Prime Minister was quite right early on to say that it wasn't a good enough reaction. A lot has changed since then, but there's still so much more work to be done.
We're bound to look immediately at Kensington and Chelsea Council itself. Now they're reconfiguring themselves, they've got a new leader, but the residents are saying, look, this is just shifting the deck chairs around. Why are you convinced that it has to be the same authority, the same councillors to resolve what's going on now that were there when the whole thing was developed?
Well, it is, I think, again, it is really important to reckon whichever local authority the kind of tragedy would happen in, it would overwhelm them, and I think it is right to look at what's the best structure, what are the resources required to take this forward. Now, as we've seen, both the chief executive, the leader of the council,
did you tell him
resigned. To go? It's their decision, but I welcome both decisions. I think there is a need for fresh leadership. We have a new leader of the council that was elected, I believe, just last night, Elizabeth Campbell.
2 weeks before he got the hint to go.
Well, I'm focusing on the new leadership, but also working with them. I want to work with them to make sure that they have the resources that are necessary. That's not just financial resources, but the expertise that's required. The new leader that's in place, I spoke to her just this morning, and I've already started discussing how we can work together and what measures need to be taken. I will be saying more about that in the coming days, but it is important that both the council recognises and that local people note as well that we do need a new, fresh approach from that council, especially when the recovery effort eventually will transfer to the council. We're not there yet, but by the time it does, we need to make sure that that council is fully prepared.
But the residents feel that just exactly the same people who took decisions in the past, I mean, the development within Kensington and Chelsea is described by quite a lot of people as, frankly, the Wild West, and the question of social housing was a mere add-on.
Well, the residents, they have a very low image of the council. I absolutely understand that. I've met many of the residents myself. I've met their family, their friends numerous times.
And there was a terrible disconnect between the council and they seem to have known nothing about the tower.
Well, it certainly seems that there was some serious issues about how they interacted with the local community, also how the tenant management organisation worked with the residents of Grenfell Tower and of neighbouring properties as well. So there are going to be so many lessons to learn from this, but I'm determined that we don't just get this right for those residents that need us right now, their families and their friends, and we do everything we can following this tragedy, but we also learn the wider lessons, not just for Kensington and Chelsea, but across the country, and see what more we need to do.
Now, I want to put this sensitively, but you have an inquiry. It's headed by a respected retired judge. He said very much that he's going to look at how the fire started, why it spread, and how it can be prevented again. And he may add on other things as well. But the residents again feel that this is a upper middle class white man, probably never been on a housing estate until he came the other day to visit them. Why didn't you go for somebody who perhaps might even mirror you? Born in Rochdale, gone right to the top, perfectly aware of how people live, and perhaps much better at connecting with them.
Well, I think the first thing is with the process is that whenever there is an independent, and rightly so, there's an independent full public inquiry under the Public Inquiries Act, the person that leads that inquiry is chosen by the Lord Chief Justice. And so that's a process I think we have to respect, because we do want this to be independent.
It has to be judge-driven.
I think you want a judge at the top of this inquiry precisely because you want to be able to compel people to come forward, give evidence, a bit like you would do in a court, so no one can avoid questioning and we can get down to really understanding what fundamentally happened and you can leave no stone unturned. I think everyone would understand the importance of that.
Will there be more than one inquiry then, perhaps? I mean, because there are so many issues aside from the fire itself.
Well, I think there'll certainly be one public inquiry, but there may be different points where the judge decides to release some conclusions. Many people are rightly asking for perhaps that we can have an interim report to draw some of the early lessons, but it is important. I think now the judge has been appointed to give the judge, Sir Martin, the time to set out how he wants these terms of reference to work. But very importantly, as he's already said himself from day one, that when he sets out those terms of reference, he must include the victims, their families, their supporters, and they must get full legal representation in doing so throughout.
And you'll keep a watching eye to see that happen.
Absolutely, and we've already made the commitment that they must be included every step of the way, and they must have full legal support that will be funded by us.
When ordinary people die in man-made disasters, Aberfan, Hillsborough, Zeebrugge, there's a shameful record in this country of cover-up, whitewash, delay. I mean, look at the years since Hillsborough, and it's taken this long to get to this point. What guarantee can you give that this just won't drag on and we will never really resolve the issues that have been thrown up by this? Because that is the record.
Yeah, well, John, I think you're absolutely right to raise this, and we just heard about a bit more about Hillsborough when the police announced that some of the people they'll be pursuing, and I'm sure that led to mixed emotions for many of the people, the families that were involved with that disaster. And there are lessons to be learned from all that, and I think the approach with this inquiry from day one has been very open, it's been very transparent. The Prime Minister...
But it's also going to be about taking responsibility. It's going to have to be about, sorry, you have to blame us, we accept it, we reckon we went wrong, and here's where we went wrong, and this is where
it absolutely has to be about understanding what went wrong, which organisations, individuals were responsible for those things. I mean, something, let's be very clear, I mean, from day one, I've said this, is that something went massively wrong that night. It was horrific what happened. It should never have happened in a country like ours, one of the richest in the world in the 21st century. That should not be happening. So something has absolutely gone wrong. It'd be wrong for me to try and speculate what exactly went wrong, but we do need to get the bottom of it, and that's why you need this kind of full public inquiry.
When Mr Corbyn said in Parliament austerity and cuts played their part in the tragedy, Conservative MPs shouted shame, shame. But what I'd like you to do is to talk me through why this is shameful when we discover that cheaper panels were installed, no sprinklers were part of the programme, the rest of it. I mean, it does seem it was a shoddy job.
No, what was shameful about that comment is trying to turn it into some kind of political football. As the Prime Minister said in response to Jeremy Corbyn's comment, let's all be honest. Let's be honest with the public. That's what the public deserve. There's been mistakes, and the inquiry will probably show this, under successive governments of all political colours, in both local government and national government. And if we are truly to learn the lessons of this, there's no point in kicking this around as some kind of football. It's about actually understanding and being honest about what's gone wrong.
181 tower blocks immediately at fire risk. I mean, 29 of them in Salford alone. Who's going to pay for them? Who's going to deal with it, and how quickly? And was Camden wrong to remove their people? Because it seems their towers are much the same as anybody else's.
Well, 190 as of this morning. Still samples are coming in. But in terms of what happens next, it's very important that as soon as those local authorities and housing associations are informed of having the wrong type of cladding, that they, with their local fire rescue service, they immediately take action. They do whatever is necessary to make those buildings safer.
The real issues now are, what is to be done about social housing? Because, I mean, in your manifesto, you talked of a new generation of homes for social rent, a constant supply of new homes for social rent. You going to stand by that? Because the housing minister, just before the election, changed the policy.
We do need more homes of every type, including more social homes, more affordable homes. Now, if we look back in the last few years...
I'm just talking not affordable, but social housing, the kind of thing that you and I grew up knowing as council houses.
Yes.
We need more of it.
We do need more of it. We need more
funded
housing
by government.
We need more houses built by councils. We need more houses built by social, with help from central government. Absolutely.
Nevertheless, you are talking about new money that we've never really heard about, that you're really going to go for gold in terms of building public housing with public money.
We will support councils. If we want the most ambitious councils, I want them to come forward with their plans for more council housing.
This is a revolution.
And we will work with them. Well, actually, it was in our manifesto.
Well,
it was in the manifesto just a few weeks ago.
Nothing like the terms you've put it.
Well, that now I've got an opportunity to talk about it much more. I welcome it.
Policy.
Yeah, this is a policy to build more of the homes that we need in this country.
What are we talking about
in the right places?
A million, which is what we're short of.
We need a lot more homes each year, whatever type of home that is.
We need to be building.
We need we've said that we want to see around at least 225 to 275,000 new homes a year. The average over the last 30 years under successive governments has been around 160,000. So we need a steps change. We've seen a lot of progress over the last few years. Well, I'm going to do everything I can to deliver more homes. I think that was one of the lessons already through the election campaign. It's, I think, one of the things that we will learn from this disaster at Grenfell Tower is that we need to provide more of the right type of homes for everyone in this country.
The Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government talking to me earlier.
And as we've heard, Sajid Javid was speaking today at the Local Government Association's annual conference in Birmingham. And not everyone there, as the Grenfell tragedy and its ramifications were digested, was happy to see him. Local authorities around the country are facing potentially huge bills for remedial work on tower blocks on their patch. And there have been warnings of a £6 billion black hole in local council finances. Here's our political correspondent, Michael Crick.
Birmingham is hosting town hall leaders this week during perhaps the most fraught time in local government history, as the Grenfell Tower disaster could stretch budgets beyond breaking point. Even some Tory council leaders are crying no to yet more cuts.
Eventually the elastic will break, and we're now very close to that point if we don't get some better news in the coming year.
We desperately need clarity on what's happening in the future with our government grant. For us in Waverley, we're due to go into a negative government grant, and we need to know what is happening there, what our actual position is.
And the Conservative peer who chairs the LGA says enough is enough.
On the basis that the government have now said, or appear to have conceded, that austerity has come to an end.
Have they?
Well, apparently so. What we want them to do is to make sure that because we were in the front of the queue when it started, we need to be in the front of the queue when it ends.
If they don't get help, he warns, this will be the picture by 2020.
Where you live, we won't be cleaning the streets, we won't be cutting the grass, we won't be putting your street lights on at all, your libraries will go, your potholes definitely won't get filled up. We'll be back to just delivering the core services that we have to deliver through statute.
And now there's the Grenfell factor. Birmingham doesn't have dangerous cladding on its 213 tower blocks, but does need to spend £31 million on sprinkler systems.
This is a national emergency, and it requires a national response. The idea that individual local councils up and down the country can actually find the money here in total really won't do. Obviously in the context of the last few years in particular, in terms of the austerity measures and so on. So it's a big capital programme in particular. We do not want to go near our services in order to provide for these extra measures. That's absolutely crucial.
Sajid Javid.
But today the Communities Secretary upset council leaders by suggesting what went wrong in Kensington reflected badly on them all.
Local government is facing a looming crisis of confidence. But if the events of the past few weeks have taught us anything, it is that together we must raise our game.
It went down in the hall like a bucket of cold sick. To try to pin the failings of one particular council and use those to tar the entire local government family was a completely outrageous thing for the Secretary of State to do, and no mention of the fact that councils have been at the hard end of cuts and have faced 40% reductions in budgets over the last few years, and no promise of any further money either.
And council leaders face stiff competition for any goodies doled out by the Chancellor from the NHS, schools, police, defence and numerous other groups too.
Michael Crick.
It was 3 weeks ago tonight that the Grenfell fire broke out, and today there was the most significant admission so far from the government that the victims had been failed by the state. The Community Secretary, Sajid Javid, said such a fire should not have been possible in Britain in 2017. There may have been failures of public policy stretching back several decades, he said.
It is impossible to miss for miles around, a monument to failure. Now, even the government can see the obvious. Today, the Community Secretary admitted in the strongest terms yet that residents of Grenfell Tower were let down.
We, as a country, we failed them. Just as we failed all the victims in that terrible tragedy.
Though the council leaders he was addressing weren't happy with where he was about to lay some of the blame.
Speaking to survivors, people in the local community and people in the tower blocks, in other tower blocks across the country, one thing is abundantly clear. Local government is facing a looming crisis of confidence.
To try to shift the blame, as the Secretary of State's trying to do, onto all councils is the most hypocritical bit of blaming and finger-pointing that I've seen in a long time. And lots of people here are saying that his speech went down like a bucket of cold sick.
There is agreement that residents were let down by Kensington and Chelsea Council. But tonight the frustration was with the coroner and police as families met them to ask about the dead and missing.
We want to know, is our family's body still there? Is there anything from them? Whatever it is, we want to know exactly what it is. Do not hide anything. And the answers that were coming back was, we don't know, we don't know, we don't know.
Distrust remains too about the chair of the inquiry. Today the local MP called for Sir Martin Moore-Bick to stand down.
I think he has to acknowledge that he's not the right person for the job. There are a lot more than just technical knowledge needed for a terrible case like this. It's a hideous humanitarian disaster. You need somebody who can actually relate to people a bit better than we've seen.
Tonight it is 3 weeks since this tower caught fire and still the authorities cannot extinguish the anger, the deep suspicion here over who leads the inquiry, who leads the council, even who leads the country. There is still much to be recovered from this wreckage, not least the truth. Paul Brandt, News at 10, West London.
Well, the testing of cladding is still going on, and 3 hospital buildings in England have so far failed fire safety tests. Our health editor, Rachel Younger, is here with me. Rachel, what more can you tell us?
Well, I think NHS England has cause to breathe at least a small sigh of relief this evening. That's because last month the government ordered urgent fire safety tests to be carried out at the 38 hospital trusts across England that were judged to be at highest risk in terms of the cladding they were using on their buildings. But what's emerged today is that in 19 of those trusts, they've been able to give them a totally clean bill of health. 11 more, no urgent action required, no immediate action. There may be further testing required. A handful, we're still waiting for those test results. But what those urgent fire safety tests have revealed is that 3 trusts in England, they've been found to use the same kind of combustible cladding that was used at Grenfell Tower. Now, worth saying that at 2 of those trusts, both King's College Hospital in South London and Sheffield Children's Hospital up in Yorkshire, that cladding is only used on administrative buildings, so not the kind of places that patients ever need to go to. But there is one hospital where the cause for concern is somewhat deeper, and that's North Middlesex University Hospital in North London. Now, there they have found similar cladding, combustible, to that used in Grenfell in both the main outpatients building and the day surgery unit, so places where outpatients would frequent. And if we look at the pictures of that hospital, I think it's worth saying that there is a main tower block there that houses a number of those wards, the inpatient wards. Now, that tower block isn't affected. It does not have combustible cladding. Still, the situation at that hospital is serious enough that the London Fire Brigade do intend to go back in there tomorrow to give advice to the trust on how best to proceed. And also worth saying that those other hospitals, the 15 or so, where so far they haven't been able to give them a totally clean bill of health, they'll still be having fire warden safety checks going on around the clock to keep patients safe.
I suppose the consequence of all this is who's going to pay for all of this?
Yeah, of course. And at the moment, actually, the Department of Local Government and Communities has picked up the bill for those immediate testings, because that is quite a costly process. Now, at both Sheffield and King's College Hospital, I'm told the cladding is already coming down, and the trust themselves are having to pick up the bill for that. If there is more urgent remedial work needed to be done, and if that runs into much more expense, then I think it will be NHS England, who already, of course, face a pretty hefty deficit, picking up the bill.
Rachel, thank you very much indeed for that.
I've been getting